Hello, welcome to BM7017 Global Marketing Management, Session 9. Our topic is Global Channel Management and Distribution Strategies. So let's start by thinking, what is a distribution channel? Well, we'll start with a quote. Palmatier et al. 2014 define a distribution channel as a set of interdependent organizations involved in the process of making a product or service available for use or consumption by the consumer or industrial user. Now, for me, the key word in that definition is interdependent. It means that the organizations are all dependent on each other in order for the distribution to happen successfully, for product to move from its point of creation to its eventual point of use. A simpler definition comes from David Jobber, the means by which products are moved from the producer to the ultimate consumer. Each of the channel members in a distribution channel performs a particular function, and some of the functions are illustrated on this slide here. Now, there can be a tendency for us to think that intermediaries, wholesalers, cash and carries, agents, brokers, actually get in the way of us getting the products that we want from their manufacturers, and that if we could somehow or other buy directly from manufacturers, we'd get things more cheaply. And there are circumstances where this is the case. But by and large, intermediaries such as wholesalers and retailers serve the needs of manufacturers and end user customers who have very, very different needs and objectives. And they perform really important functions without which the customer would have to do them or the manufacturer, and that would add to costs. So, for example, manufacturers want to produce large quantities of a single product at one point in time, package them all up together and send them out of the factory. Hundreds of rolls of paper towel, hundreds of boxes of paper tissues, thousands of packets of sweets, all going out of the factory, all packaged up. You as a consumer want to buy one box of paper tissues, one roll of kitchen roll, one bag of sweets. You don't want to buy 10 or 100 or 1,000. So somebody's got to get in the middle and break bulk, break these big packages down into smaller lots and then down into individual packs that the consumer can come and buy. Similarly, when we shop, we don't want to have to go to one producer to buy paper tissues and then a completely separate producer to buy sweets and a completely separate producer to buy a tin of beans. We quite like to be able to go into a shop and get all those things together. And so another important function that distributors fulfill is bringing together assortments. So we can go into a department store and we can look at kitchen goods, we can look at clothing, we can look at electrical items, we can go to the food hall and purchase some food all under one roof. So the retailer in that sense, and online retailers do the same thing. They bring together assortments of goods so that you can shop for a range of items at one time. So distributors, rather than adding costs and complexity, actually in many cases simplify and streamline the distribution of goods and services. Imagine if you had to deal independently and directly with the manufacturer of every single thing that you have bought in the last 6 months, each individual item. Think how many transactions that would involve and the complexity, the scope to get things wrong, for things to go astray, for your money not to be received. It would be very complicated. Putting distributors in the middle changes all of that. You as a consumer can go to a retailer and buy an assortment of the things that you want in the quantities that you want. There are some important concepts in the area of distribution channel management. The first of which is channel level. When we refer to the level of a distribution channel, we're referring to a particular layer of intermediaries that performs some specific distribution tasks. So, for example, wholesalers would be a channel level, or retailers would be a channel level. Channel flow is another important concept, and that simply means the movement of products, services, money, and information up and down the channel. So products and services generally move from the point of production through various intermediaries potentially to the end user, the consumer, the person who's going to purchase and use the product or the service. Money generally flows the other way, from the consumer, the purchaser, to the retailer or the agent, back to the manufacturer or the service provider, with possibly other intermediate steps too. Now, plumbing is quite a good analogy here. In a plumbing system, you want things to flow smoothly all the time. You don't want any blockages and you don't want any leaks. And it's exactly the same thing with distribution channels. You want products, services, money, and information to flow quickly and smoothly. You don't want any product to leak out of the channel, i.e. be stolen or pilfered. And you don't want any blockages. You don't want a whole consignment of goods being held up in a wholesaler or distribution point and not moving on to the next level of the channel. So flow, smooth, efficient flow is essential to keep channels working optimally. Another key concept in the world of distribution channel management is channel conflict. Now, we've looked at the beginning in the definition of distribution that distributors or channel members are interdependent. They're interdependent, but even channels that usually work well, from time to time, there may be conflict between channel members. And this conflict should be addressed quickly and attempts should be made to avoid it at all costs wherever possible, because it has a very dysfunctional and destabilizing effect on the overall channel. There are really two sorts of conflict, horizontal and vertical. Let's look first at horizontal conflict. This is conflict between organizations at the same level of a channel. So, for example, in a town or a city, two retailers may stock a manufacturer's product. One retailer may have been given more preferential terms than the other, and therefore able to stock a product at a lower price. Now, if that was to happen, that would be a very stupid decision on the part of the manufacturer, because it would immediately lead to conflict, not only amongst those retailers, but between each retailer back to the manufacturer. So you get all sorts of problems resulting, and neither of those retailers is going to be working optimally as a result, as a stockist, as a dealer, as a provider of service to the end user customers. Vertical conflict is more common, and that is conflict between different levels in the channel. So a manufacturer having a dispute with a wholesaler because product has not been stored in the right conditions. Perhaps the wholesaler hasn't taken care of the product sufficiently, and it's got damp, maybe some camera equipment or electrical equipment, which means that a consignment has been damaged and customers have had to return the product. And while the product will be replaced and the wholesaler is financially liable, nonetheless, there can be damage to the manufacturer's reputation. The brand is damaged because the consumer has purchased a Canon camera or a Samsung phone, which turns out to be damaged. And they don't really know about the wholesaler, so they blame the manufacturer. So that sort of conflict, again, needs to be addressed very quickly, nipped in the bud and dealt with before it escalates and creates even more problems in the distribution channel. But it's very, very difficult to eliminate conflict, inevitably in business, with different parties having different objectives, different value systems, different structures, and just the realities of day-to-day commerce. There will, from time to time, be conflict. And that's why our final key concept on this slide is channel organization. And the way that the channel is organized is an attempt to mitigate against conflict and to deal with conflict. And the more there has been conflict in the past, the more scope there is for conflict, the more likely it is that the channel organisation is going to be quite strong. Channel organisation doesn't have to be strong. It can be relatively weak, it can be informal, or it can be very, very formal, contractually bound, and possibly even involving one organisation in the channel owning other members. So at the bottom of the slide there, channel organisation is defined as the management and the possible ownership of the channel by the most powerful member. And the most powerful member is sometimes referred to as the channel captain. So, for example, in the grocery sector in the UK, the channel captains are usually the retailers. The large, powerful retailers like Sainsbury's, Asda and Tesco. They exert considerable power over manufacturers. Let's look now at distribution channel strategy. So when you are designing and developing this part of your marketing plan, what are the things that you need to take into consideration? What are the decisions that you need to make? Well, the first is the length of the channel. How many levels do you need to get the product or the service from the point of production to the point of consumption? Channel length is largely dependent on the nature of the product. So different types of products will have different lengths of channel. And channel length is inversely related to the degree of perishability of the product. Also inversely related to its value and to its complexity. So by that, I mean that highly perishable products with a short shelf life that need to be stored in particular conditions, ice cream being a good example, tend to have very short channels because they can't be hanging around in warehouses for any length of time. They need to go from manufacturer to retailer as quickly as possible. High value products such as very, very expensive watches, cameras, high-end electrical goods, etc., would also tend to have shorter distribution channels because the longer the channel, the more intermediaries involved, the greater the scope for the product to be stolen, to be damaged in some way. High value items are obviously very desirable and can attract theft from out of a distribution channel, or they can simply encounter some damage along the way. So to mitigate against that, it makes sense to keep the channel as short as possible. The more complex the product, again, the shorter the channel is potentially likely to be, because you need to have a very close direct relationship between the manufacturer and the retailer, because the retailer is going to need support and training and help to explain the complex product to the end user consumer. And if there are lots of other layers and levels of distribution getting in the way, the retailer won't have such a direct relationship with the manufacturer, and the kind of training and information and support that they need will not be so readily and easily available. The next issue within distribution channel strategy that needs to be decided upon is the kind of skills and competences that each channel member should have. What do we want channel members actually to be able to do? Now, for things like wholesalers, generally fairly standard. They take product from manufacturers, they store it in large quantities, sometimes in temperature controlled conditions, otherwise just in safe warehouses, and then they pass it on to either directly to retailers, large retailers, or to cash and carries for the lots to be further broken down for small retailers like corner shops. But with the retailers, there are quite a lot of choices that can be made about the types of retailers that you would choose, the skills and the competences that you want them to have. A retailer can be a very powerful ally for a manufacturer, and you can have retail staff who almost seem to work for the manufacturer, to be brand ambassadors. who can explain all of the functionality of the Sony television or the Apple iPad or whatever it happens to be. And so some manufacturers choose retailers very, very carefully, choose retailers that have high quality staff, where they're going to be able to work with the retailer to educate and train staff accordingly. With other sorts of products or other manufacturers who would prefer customers to get customer support directly from the manufacturer, the skills and the competences of the retailer need not be so great. And you're looking there for somebody who can explain the basics of a product, but not necessarily go into any particular technical detail. And thirdly, a distribution channel strategy needs to address distribution intensity. And this relates to the number of different channels that will be used, first of all. So we can use offline, physical store channels, retail outlets, etc. We can use online channels, and we can use mobile channels. We can also potentially use printed catalogues as a channel and the telephone. So the choice needs to be made about which of those channels are going to be used. And the norm these days, certainly in the consumer marketing world, is 3 channels: offline, online, mobile. Those are the main 3 channels that consumers use these days. In business to business, you would normally have an online channel, and the equivalent of the offline or store channel would be sales agents who go out and visit key customers and provide them with support, with information, take orders from them, etc. Second part of distribution intensity is the number of intermediaries that would stock the product at each level of the channel. So how many wholesalers do you need? How many retailers do you need? And there are essentially 3 strategies here for distribution intensity: intensive distribution, selective distribution, and exclusive distribution. Now, intensive distribution is appropriate for relatively low value everyday items which are going to be purchased regularly, where the consumer is not likely to travel very far to buy them. And so you need the product to be available in as many points of sale as possible. So examples there would be confectionery, bottled water, snacks, sandwiches, paper tissues, things of that, newspapers, magazines. So we would expect to find these in a very, very large number of different types of retail outlets and not have to travel very far. Corner shops, petrol station forecourt shops, vending machines, and so on and so forth. Selective distribution would be appropriate for products like clothing, footwear, etc. You wouldn't expect to be able to find a pair of Nike running shoes in your corner shop, but equally you wouldn't expect to have to travel 50 or 100 miles unless you live in a very remote area to buy a pair of Nike running shoes. You would expect your nearest reasonably sized shopping centre or a good selection of online stores to provide you with a selection of Nike running shoes. So selective distribution occurs where a manufacturer chooses a carefully selected number of distributors to make the product available, and therefore it's relevant to clothing, footwear, furniture, electrical goods, and such things. Exclusive distribution operates in 2 main ways. Exclusive distribution is, as the name suggests, the most limited distribution strategy, where your product or service is only going to be made available through a very, very small number of carefully chosen distributors. Now, this can be because the market for your product is quite small, you may be following a concentrated targeting strategy. If you remember back to session 3, the market targeting strategies, we employ concentrated marketing for high value luxury items, very specialist items like very expensive cameras, professional grade camera lenses, etc. You simply would not expect to find those in a large number of distributors. So where the target market for a product is very small, exclusive distribution is relevant. And that's why there are many fewer Aston Martin dealerships or Ferrari dealerships in countries than there are Ford or General Motors or Volkswagen dealerships, because the market is so very small. Very few people can afford to buy these exclusive sports cars. But there is another setting in which exclusive distribution can occur, and that is where a manufacturer gives a distributor exclusive rights in a particular area. And usually that happens with new products. So, for example, in the United Kingdom, initially iPhones were only available through one network provider, O2, and one mobile phone retailer, Carphone Warehouse. And they had an exclusive deal with Apple. It didn't last for very long, maybe a year or so, but it certainly created a great buzz, and it allowed O2 and Carphone Warehouse the space and the possibility to make a big splash about being the exclusive distributor. So it could create a great deal of excitement in a market to provide that sort of exclusive arrangement. But generally speaking, it doesn't last very long. Then distribution channels have to be managed day in, day out once they have been developed and set up. And so in specific, channel members need to be selected, recruited. Their responsibilities need to be decided on. For example, who has how much leeway does a retailer have on setting a price? Channel members have to be educated and trained on an ongoing basis, particularly in the more specialist product categories like electronic equipment and high-end consumer electricals. And support needs to be provided to channel members, obviously information about products and prices, but also merchandising materials, what's known as point of sale or point of purchase support, posters, brochures, displays, which can be used in store to showcase and merchandise items in an attractive and eye-catching manner. Customer service support needs to be provided. Some of that will be provided by channel members, some of it will be referred back to manufacturers, and advice and help on an ongoing basis. Channel members need to be motivated and incentivized to sell the product on to the next level of the channel. You don't want your product languishing in a retailer because the retail staff can't be bothered to sell it. You don't want your product languishing in a wholesaler because they can't be bothered to move it on to retailers. And so sales promotion activities, advertising, competitions, etc. are also carried out on a business-to-business basis within distribution channels. And so there may be a prize for the best retailer that sells most of a particular product. There may be special discounts if you sell over a certain amount of product through the channel in a time period. So marketing communications operate within distribution channels just as they do operate directly to end user consumers. And finally, channels need to be evaluated on an ongoing basis. The number of sales made, the amount of revenue, the profit, the number of returns, the problems, the complaints, etc. And channel members who are working effectively, who are doing a good job, need to be retained and further motivated and incentivized. And channel members who are not doing such a good job, perhaps the contract needs to be ended and a new distribution partner sought. Let's go back now to think about channel organisation again in a bit more detail, now that we've got a handle on what a distribution channel is and what a distribution strategy looks like. And remember that channel organisation is a way of overcoming conflict in a channel. So a conventional channel doesn't really have much organisation. The channel members are all independent of each other contractually and from an ownership point of view, but they're interdependent. They rely on each other, but they rely on goodwill to keep the channel working smoothly. If that doesn't work, if there is conflict, then possibly a vertical marketing system may be introduced, a VMS, where there is organisation and coming together in some way at a vertical level through the channel. The most extreme form of vertical marketing system is a corporate VMS, where one channel member owns all the other parts of the channel. This is very common within the oil and petroleum sector. So BP, Exxon, they own petrol stations. Sometimes they franchise them, but they also own them. They own refineries, they own the oil fields where oil is extracted, they own the distributors that move the crude oil around, etc., and the refined petrol and diesel. So these are good examples of corporate VMS. So you have one organisation that pretty much owns everything. And obviously the advantage there is control. There is no conflict really because everything is owned by the same company. The disadvantage is obviously the cost, but also the organisation needs to develop a very wide range of competencies. It needs to be a manufacturer, it needs to be a retailer, it needs to be a distributor, it needs to understand and manage logistics and supply chain and control. All of these things it needs to be excellent in to compete. And that's actually quite challenging for organisations to undertake. The next level down in terms of strength of organisation is the contractual VMS. And this is where channel members are bound by contractual ties. And possibly the best example of a contractual VMS is a franchise. A franchise is a contractual way of organising a distribution channel. So the franchisor, for example, Domino's Pizza, will contract with the franchisee, and a local operator who pays to have the right to run a Domino's Pizza store in a particular town or city. And the franchisee, in return for their money, gets a very, very detailed blueprint of how to run the Domino's Pizza business. And that's all set out in a very high degree of detail. They also are provided with marketing support and other forms of support, such as marketing, advertising, advice, technical support if something goes wrong with equipment, etc. So that can be quite an attractive way of organising distribution for both the franchisee and the franchisor. The franchisor can expand their business very quickly without having to tie up capital in owning all of these individual stores. So they've got quite asset light expansion, which means it can be very quick. They also have quite a high degree of control over the franchisees because of the franchise blueprint. Every detail is written down. What kind of flour needs to be used, and that will be supplied usually for pizzas by the franchisor. How long to cook the base, the tomatoes, the uniforms, the layout of the store, the menus, etc., etc. All of that is set out in detail. And so the franchises end up being very consistent, a high level of control results. Franchising is also attractive for the franchisee. They want to run their own business, but they don't really have a clear idea of what sort of business they want to run. they can buy into a franchise, a proven business model, a proven business blueprint. And as a result, they may be more likely to get funding from a bank for the money that they need to buy into the franchise agreement, because the franchise has a higher degree of success than a completely independent small business starting up from scratch. The final sort of VMS, vertical marketing system, is the least controlled, if you like, is the weakest in terms of the level of control. And that is the administered VMS, where there is no ownership and no specific contracts, but the channel is controlled by the biggest and the most powerful member, the channel captain. They call the shots. They manage things and dictate terms. Most of the information comes from them. Most of the pricing decisions come from them. So they are, if you like, effectively de facto in charge of the channel. There's also horizontal organisation that can occur within distribution, and this tends to happen within a single organisation. The best example would be the effective organisation of sales territories. An organisation like, say, Avon or Mary Kay that is selling cosmetics through agents will want each agent to work optimally. And that means that the agents really need to have sales territories of pretty much equal sales potential. Otherwise, they'll start to try and steal customers from each other. If they perceive that the agent next door has got a better sales territory, a richer sales territory with more sales potential than theirs, then there will be conflict. And so organizations that use sales executives can use computerized technology, mapping, drive time information systems, geographical information systems, and so on, tools like that, to develop sales territories that are roughly equal in terms of the logistics of getting around them and the potential business that is available. And in that way, they hope to organize their channel horizontally to reduce conflict. So here are some graphical examples then. On the left, we have the conventional distribution channel. 4 players, completely independent. They're interdependent, but they're not owned by any one of the members of the channel. There are no contracts. On the right, we have the vertically organized marketing system or vertically organized distribution channel, where you can see that the manufacturer, the retailer, and the wholesaler have been brought together in an aligned and organized manner, either through ownership, through contract, or through the power and the muscle of the most powerful channel member, the channel captain. Let's look now at multi-channel distribution. We've talked a little bit about this, but let's just spend a few more minutes looking at multi-channel distribution, because this has been a major change in the world of distribution over the last couple of decades. And I mentioned that really there are 3 main channels: offline, the brick and mortar physical stores; online, clicks; and mobile channel, browser and apps. And also still in some markets and some parts of the world, the telephone and catalogues play a key role in distribution. Now, each of these channels have different characteristics, different strengths and weaknesses. They offer different value to customers. They have different levels of media richness. And by that, I mean the extent to which you can have real-time, synchronous, interactive communication between the channel member and a customer. So probably the most media rich would be the offline store channel. You can go into a store, you can have a one-to-one conversation discussion with a sales agent. You can see product and merchandise, you can pick it up, you can try it on, you can test it out. And so you've got a very high degree of media richness there. At the moment, the least rich of the 3 main channels is the mobile channel, although technological developments are leading to a richer and richer mobile experience all the time, particularly through the use of apps. But essentially, each channel, with its own characteristics and strengths and so on, offers different value to customers. The mobile channel obviously has the advantage of geography. You can take it with you anywhere. It's completely on your person all the time, always on, but also knows where you are. And so when you're in a store, your phone can pick up beacon technology and you can pick up real-time information about the product that you're standing next to in a store. Or while you're in a store looking at a product, you can go online and see what price it would be at different retailers, online and offline, and so on. But what you don't get on the mobile channel is that one-to-one interactive experience with a sales agent. And the online channel is sort of somewhere in the middle. Bigger screens provides more functionality for ordering and ranking and comparing products on their characteristics, but you can't necessarily carry a computer around with you everywhere. So a multi-channel strategy is the use of more than one of the above of these channels to reach the target segments. And obviously the specific channels that are chosen will depend on the nature of the target market, the target market's requirements, their needs and wants, what they're looking for in distribution. And increasingly, organisations are using what's known as an omni-channel strategy. And that means that they have a presence in all possible channels to maximise what are called customer touch points. And a customer touch point is a point at which either a physical or a digital point where the customer and a brand come into contact with one another. So have a look at this diagram for a minute or two, and you might want to pause the video here with the diagram on screen so that you can think about it. And this is an exercise for you to work on in preparation for our class session. Here's a multi-channel retailing example. We've got one manufacturer and we've got two consumer market segments, consumer segment 1 and consumer segment 2, and two business segments, business segment 1 and business segment 2. And the manufacturer uses a different distribution strategy, different channel for each of these four segments. So what I'd like you to think about is what kind of product might be being sold here? What types of products? There's more than one. Think of some examples of products that would fit this kind of setting. What might the manufacturer be manufacturing? And then when you've done that, think about the four segments. How might the two consumer segments differ? What would be the difference possibly between consumer segment 1 and 2 that would make them want to buy in these different ways? Consumer segment 1 wanting to buy direct from the manufacturer, where consumer segment 2 wanting to buy through a retailer. And similarly, what might be the difference between business segments 1 and 2? And keep your notes and bring your answers to these questions with you when you come to the next session. So let's carry on talking about multi-channel strategy for a few more minutes. So we've seen that a multi-channel strategy involves the use of more than one distribution channel to reach the target market. And so the overall number of channels used and the type of channels used determines the overall number of customer touch points, these physical and digital places where a brand and a customer can come into contact. Now, the channels that an organisation uses to reach its customers can be integrated or not. And that is another very, very important decision to be made. The level of channel integration, in other words, the extent to which the online and the offline and the mobile channel mirror each other, have similar product ranges, prices, similar experiences. This affects retailer profit and the customer experience. And it is generally considered that the higher the level of integration, the better the customer experience, although the more expensive it will be to run the channels, and therefore the retailer's profit potentially will be reduced. So the level of channel integration certainly affects branding. Branding should be consistent, and so whether that is the retailer's own brand or a manufacturer's brand that is being sold in different retail channels. So the more integrated the channels, the greater chance there is for consistency of branding. When we think about product ranges and product assortments in each channel, these can be similar, in other words, substitutive. So the channels are substitutes for each other. So it doesn't matter which channel you go on, you will see the same range of merchandise. That would be common in clothing retailers, for example. So if you went into a Zara store and you went online and looked at the Zara store online, or you looked at the Zara app, you would expect to see the same clothing items coming up at the same prices. Other organisations take a more complementary approach to product range and assortment, with a much larger range of merchandise available online than in physical stores. And some organisations treat their channels as independent silos with no relationship between them at all. And so each channel is run like a separate business and is able to set up its own product range or assortment. That's increasingly rare because it leads to a disjointed experience for the customer that creates customer confusion, but it does still exist in some situations. Now, once the product range per channel has been decided upon, then pricing per channel also needs to be decided upon. If the channels are substitutive, then the prices should be the same. It can be extremely confusing for the customer to find the same pair of shoes at different prices in the store and on the retailer's online store, and that can lead to some resentment and customer complaints. However, if the product ranges are complementary or independent, then you would expect to find different prices being used in each channel. And generally speaking, the online channel would have, and the mobile channel would have the lower prices, and the store would have the higher price because of the added value that the store channel provides through customer service, changing rooms, fitting rooms, support, advice, etc. I'm not going to say too much about promotion because that is addressed in other modules, but clearly promotional media are also touch points. So we need to think about how promotion is going to be used in each channel, links to brand social media pages, links to other websites, etc. What sort of advertising is going to be used from each channel, and so on and so forth. And then the level of channel integration also affects the way that the channels function relative to one another. So, for example, if you have integrated channels, you can allow for click and collect, where you can order online and pick up in store, or a flexible returns policy, where it doesn't really matter which channel you buy in, you can return in any other channel. So you can buy online and return in a store, you can buy in a store and send back online. And all of these, every time you introduce that level of flexibility, you're adding convenience for the customer. And really, there is a need to offer maximum convenience to customers because customers have a lot of choice, and the channels chosen and the channel strategy need to accommodate shoppers' behaviour. And shoppers are behaving in all sorts of different ways these days through multi-channel. So we define multi-channel shopping as the use of different channels for different shopping events, or what are called shopper journeys. So, for example, a shopper may occasionally shop online for groceries, maybe once a fortnight or once a month, and then top up in between with regular smaller shopping trips to a local convenience store or a small format supermarket. Omni-channel shopping is defined as the use of multiple channels during a single shopper journey, and this is increasingly common. Omni-channel shopping is brought to life through something called research shopping. showrooming and web rooming, the use of one channel to search for ideas and evaluate, and another channel to purchase. So showrooming, for example, is where you start your shopping in a store. You go into a store and you look at alternatives, you maybe talk to staff, you might touch and feel and try products, and then you go and buy online, possibly from the same retailer's website, but possibly, and worryingly for the retailer, you might then leak away to somebody else, like Alibaba or Amazon or eBay, to purchase. Web rooming is the other way around. You start your shopping online, you do your research online, and then you go into a store to see, to try, and to buy. So these are fantastically beneficial, these newer forms of shopping for the shopper. But as I said, there is a risk of potential loss of sales to the retailers if channel lock-in is not established or retailer lock-in is not established. And there is some evidence, some research evidence to suggest that showrooming can actually have quite a negative impact on in-store sales staff. When people come into a shop, use their time, use their expertise, don't buy, and the employee has the distinct impression that they're going to go away to buy online from somebody else, they can feel very disheartened. It can have an impact on their morale, their feelings of self-efficacy, their enjoyment of their job, and their performance in their job. So the final topic in this session, we'll look now at global issues in distribution channel management. When an organisation wants to market its products outside of its domestic home country, its headquarters country, it needs distributors in each of its overseas markets. And those overseas distributors act as the gateway to a new country or to a multi-country market. They're critically important, particularly for organisations that don't have a strong overseas presence, that are relying on exporters, overseas distributors to get their product into the right retail channels, etc. And these overseas distributors also act as the face of the organisation abroad. They can become brand ambassadors in a sense. They have enormous responsibility. They are the avenue or the conduit through which the manufacturing organisation's marketing effort is channeled. So it is very, very important to choose the right ones, particularly where an organisation is new to international marketing or is less experienced and is going to be more reliant on the overseas distributors to help them understand cultural norms, local market environments, etc. Yuzuni and Lee 2009 said that distribution is the element of the marketing mix most deeply rooted in culture because it is closely related to everyday life and to human relationships. And I think that's very, very important for us to remember. Shopping, retailing is all about people, and the way that we do that varies enormously from country to country and culture to culture. And in business to business is all about human relationships, people communicating with each other. And as we saw back in session 2, cultural distance has a very big impact on relationships, on the way that people communicate, their body language, the level of context in their communications. And so we have to find a way to bridge the cultural distance so that people who have very differing styles of communication can actually communicate effectively, understand each other, and work together. And global distributors like export agents and so on can play a huge role here in bridging the gap between the manufacturer in one country and the retailers in the home market. They can act as a kind of go-between to smooth out the cultural distances and differences. Culture also has an impact on how we shop, and there is some research data to support this. And thinking back to the Hofstede model that we looked at earlier in this module, online channel use, so shopping online, is positively correlated with the levels of individualism and masculinity in a culture. and is negatively correlated with the levels of uncertainty avoidance and long-term orientation, whereas the use of the telephone channel to shop is correlated positively with uncertainty avoidance and long-term orientation. So there's lots of evidence that we can't just assume people are going to shop and use channels and respond to channels in the same way everywhere. All the more reason for an organisation to use local distributors on the ground who can help them to pick and choose the right sort of channels to meet local cultural needs and norms. Finally, we come back to costs again, and as we looked at briefly in our session on pricing, when we distribute a product overseas, extra costs are involved. Distance from market means increased transport time is money. Increased inventory is required because it's going to take longer for product to get there, so you need to send in larger quantities. Can't afford to send small batches all the time. Potential cash flows delays and problems. Increased costs because product needs to be insured in a more complex way for longer periods for different types of situations and settings. And then we've got the actual transport costs themselves. Products need to be moved either by sea, by air, or by land. And there are costs involved in all of those and risks too. So air transportation is the most expensive, but they're the one least likely to result in damage to products and in theft. But there are strong size and weight limitations on what can be transported, etc. Increased costs result from increased documentation required to get a product through customs in a foreign market. There are duties to be paid, extra packaging, the cost of management because global distribution is more complex, and then you obviously have to factor in the fact that some product is going to be lost or damaged. So all of these extra costs create price escalation. And in our workshop session this week, we're going to look at parallel trading, which results from price escalation. We've got a workshop which is going to examine the concept of parallel trading, which occurs when there are differences in the price of a product between country markets. And so unauthorized distributors can see an opportunity to buy a product in a higher price market, sell it into a lower price market, and still make some profit as a result. So we will return to these issues of extra costs and the problems that they create at our class session when we look at parallel trading. But that's all from this session now.